Okay, in today's lesson, we're going to be learning about interactions that occur within the ecosystems. So, this is going to be interactions between two living organisms, and it could be for either food or for other types of advantages. But we're going to be learning about all the different types that exist and what goes on to have those things exist. Now, with the notes again, I want you to write on the left-hand column any of the bolded definitions, and on the right-hand column any examples or extensions that'll help you remember. That can be any, it can be any of the things that I say here in the recording, or also any of the things that you see on the slides. So, without further ado, let's get started. Now, the first thing I want us to talk about is a habitat. So all of the organisms exist in a habitat, which is described as all of the biotic and abiotic factors in an area where an organism lives. So this is really all aspects of their environment. It can be any of the organisms that live there. It could be humans when they come into that habitat. It can be the temperature, the water, soil quality, all types of things that we've learned about with biotic and abiotic factors. But in particular, we're looking at the ones that affect the organism that we're talking about in this regard. So, one of the things I want you guys to be thinking about is what kind of a habitat a human being lives in, and what do we do to the habitat to actually make it more for us to live in. Now, within the habitat, all of the organisms fill this thing which is known as an ecological niche. An ecological niche is composed of all of the physical, chemical, and biological factors that a species needs to survive and to reproduce. So some examples of these things are the food that it eats, so what it eats, how it eats. So if they're an herbivore and they only eat certain types of plants, say for example like the monarch butterfly only eating milkweed, that's important versus something that might be an omnivore and eat multiple different things. Now with abiotic conditions, we're looking at temperatures and water that is needed to survive. So if it's an aquatic creature that only can survive underwater, something that can come outside of it, things that can only live in certain temperatures, that's all important to its niche. And finally, behaviors. Does it come out during the day? Does it come out at night? How does it reproduce and when does it reproduce? Now, within a niche, we have things that can happen called competitive exclusion. One of those things here is when two species are competing for the same resources. One species is going to be better suited for that niche, and the other species has two options: either to be pushed into another niche entirely or to go extinct. This happens a lot when a organism might come in and invade the area of another organism. Um, Say, for example, lizards will often be territorial and fight for areas. And if one is more suited for that area, then the other one will have to be pushed out or die. And this can happen with species too. When we learned about evolution, we were actually really talking a lot about competitive exclusion. If things do not change to be better suited for their niche, they need to either move to a different area or they do go extinct and no longer live. Now, with niches, there are things also known as ecological equivalents because not all niches are by each other. So, an ecological equivalents are species that occupy similar niches, but they live in different regions. So, there are deserts all over the world. So, there's deserts in America, and the mice found there live in the same niche as deserts in or in Asia, but they don't compete with each other at all. So, one thing I want you to think about is where are some other places that might be similar ecological niches, ecological equivalents, and have similar niches to where we are here in the Great Lakes regions of America. Now, one of these competitions that can happen in these niches is in fact competition, and it occurs when two organisms fight for the same limited resources. So, if two lions are fighting over the same gazelle, one lion will eat the gazelle and catch the gazelle. The other lion will not. One will go hungry, and it'll either have to go to an area where it can catch gazelles again, try better that next time to outcompete the other lion, or die. So, what are some other resources outside of food an organism can fight over? Because it's not just food that is required for reproduction, passing on of genetics, and to live. There's other things that are needed as well. So, I want you to think about if there's other things that things can fight over. Now, along with competition, there's also a thing known as predation, which you guys talked about when you were doing your food webs and food chains. So, predation is the process by which one organism captures and feeds upon another organism. An example here is from our food chains that we did about a month ago, which is a snake captures a mouse to eat it for energy. Predation can happen in a lot of other different ways too, like the lion and the gazelle example that we had before. It could be birds eating worms. It could be a snake eating that bird. And there's multiple different areas in which things have predation occurring. It could be bugs eating leaves as well. So I want you to think of what's another example of predation interaction in an ecosystem other than the ones that I just described. Because more examples that you have, the easier it is going to be able to understand this. The next couple of relations that we're going to talk about are ones known as symbiosis. And symbiosis are close ecological relationships between two or more organisms of different species that live in direct contact with one another. So, symbiosis is going to be seen inside of a habitat where two organisms, each maybe fulfilling their own separate niches, do interact with each other and can either help or hurt each other, regardless of how they interact. There's three major symbiotic relationships that we're going to talk about: mutualism, commensalism, and parasitism. And we're going to talk about those in the next slides. The first one I want to talk about is going to be mutualism. Mutualism is an interspecies interaction in which both organisms benefit from one another. So, for example, the bacteria living in our intestines and us are a mutualistic relationship. There are bacteria living in our intestines, billions and billions of them actually. And what happens is that they break down the food that we digest in our stomach. They break it down, and because of that breakdown, we're able to get energy from that food. If all the bacteria was gone from our intestines, we would die. But since they're there, they get a free meal as well because we ingest the food. So we actually go out and get the food for them. They break it down for us. We receive the benefit. They also receive the benefit. So I want you to think about some other mutualistic interactions in an ecosystem. We've read about some in class, and you can find some online as well. There's dozens and dozens and dozens of these mutualism interactions that we can look into. The second of the three symbiotic relationships we're going to learn about is known as commensalism. Commensalism is a relationship between two organisms in which one of the organisms benefit and the other one is unaffected. So one of the big examples of this is from Finding Nemo, which is a clownfish living in a sea anemone. So when a clownfish lives in a sea anemone, it's actually covered in this mucus coating that prevents it from getting stung from the anemone. But everything else that would eat the clownfish would get stung by the sea anemone and get poisoned from it. But the sea anemone doesn't gain anything from the clownfish living there. The clownfish is just taking advantage of the fact that the thing is poisonous and it's immune against it. So in this example, the clownfish is benefiting while the sea anemone actually has no damage done to it. So I want you to think about any other commensalistic relationships that exist in the ecosystem. They're a little bit harder to find because we often think of things that hurt something or to help something. We don't think of things that don't do anything at all. But I want you to kind of go and look for some examples and find one that really sticks with you to help you understand this commensalism relationship. The final of the three symbiotic relationships that we're talking about is known as parasitism. So parasitism is a relationship between two organisms where one organism benefits and the second organism is harmed but not killed. If the other organism is killed, it goes from parasitism to predation. So in this example, the host, which is the organism that's being hurt by the other one, is not killed at all. So one of the big examples that we know of is a mosquito biting us as a human. If mosquito harms us, it causes an allergic reaction, actually. It causes a histamine reaction, making this bump. And the mosquito actually draws blood from us. So it actually does do some damage, though it's very small. But it doesn't kill us. But it does use us for that meal. So the mosquito benefits by getting a meal from us, and we do have some measure of harm done to us. There are more extreme examples of parasitism. So for one of the big examples is a tapeworm, causing us to lose nutrients in our intestines by that tapeworm taking some from us. But I want you to be thinking about some other parasitic interactions that happen in the ecosystem as well. Our final slide here is just a brief overview of symbiosis that I really, really like because all of the examples are actually involving bacteria that exist on us or in us that we don't tend to think about. So the first one here is mutualism, where both organisms benefit again, and that's bacteria in our colon. So in our intestines, that bacteria is breaking down all that food so that we can go ahead and get our nutrients from it. Now, the commensalism relationship is one we really don't think about. The one organism that benefits is something known as bacteria known as Staphylococcus that gets a free ride on us while it doesn't do any harm to us at all. And the final one is parasitism, where we can get harmed by tuberculosis, the bacteria that causes tuberculosis, and that lives in our lungs and does damage to us. So it harms us, but it doesn't harm itself. It actually lives from it being there. That takes us to the end of our presentation. If you have any questions, please ask, and thank you.